This is the Royal Report.
Good evening, welcome to the Royal Report. I'm Caroline DeRusso, and here's what we've got coming up on our show tonight. 2 senior royals are still out of action on medical grounds. We'll give you the latest details. Claims that the Sussexes could become royals for hire. We'll tell you exactly what that means. And the Sussexes' recent controversy in Jamaica, it really has raised eyebrows. Russell Myers joins us from London with the latest. But before we get to all that, this year we expect there to be more official overseas royal visits. Now, we know that following the Queen's death, King Charles was keen to spend time in the United Kingdom to maintain and renew relationships at home. And even following his coronation, there were very few overseas visits. In fact, the King and Queen's overseas visits for 2023 were limited to Germany, France and Kenya. So far this year, Princess Anne has visited Sri Lanka and Prince Edward is currently in St Helena. Despite the King's recent health issues, Charles still is not in a rush to go abroad. Queen Camilla apparently is not too keen on long-distance travel, so that may dampen the enthusiasm for visiting far-flung places, that was a mouthful, or being away from England for too long. It's likely we will see other senior royals taking on overseas royal visits to lighten the load for the King and Queen. That said, there are plans to visit at least Samoa and Australia in 2024 for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. And now that the King and Queen are settled into their roles, we expect other visits will be announced as the year progresses. Of course, with greater emphasis on independence from colonial powers and discourse around historic imperial wrongs and the like, overseas royal visits tend to be tinged with a bit more political risk than perhaps they were previously. We saw this when William and Kate visited the Caribbean in 2022. A royal tour that was intended to strengthen ties instead became embroiled in backlash over slavery, reparations and calls for independence. Consequently, it raised eyebrows this week when Harry and Meghan, on a visit to Jamaica, were photographed with its Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, who, in 2022, during William and Kate's visit, told the visiting royals that Jamaica was moving on and intended to become a republic.
Jamaica is, as you would see, a country that is very proud of our history, very proud of what we have achieved, and we are moving on as an independent, developed, prosperous country.
Whether there is anything instructive in the meeting between Harry and the Jamaican PM is up for debate, although anyone aware of the background will find it at least a little bit curious. But against that backdrop of increasing cynicism towards colonialism, each royal visit will have its own political sensitivities and perception challenges. Which realms are visited, by who, when, they will all be factored in determining the schedule for upcoming visits. There will be some testing of the waters following the passing of a queen as popular as Queen Elizabeth. And while we can expect more visits in 2024, we can also expect caution, so as not to spark too much unwanted or unkind attention, because no doubt there will be a few more controversies. Joining us now is News Corp columnist Angela Mollard and entertainment reporter for news.com.au, Bronte Koy. Ladies, welcome to the show. Now let's start with royal visits. Bronte, do you think the King's recent health issue, do you think that there is going to impact this year or really any future overseas travel for the couple?
You said it so well at the top there, which is that it is a political minefield at the moment, these overseas visits. But to put it bluntly, Charles is not in a position in this transitional period for the monarchy to be seen to be shirking away from anything that he has planned to do, for example, Samoa and Australia this year, and also shirking away from any of that potential unpleasantness that will arise. William, you know, most of them have seen the light in that you need to look into it and make at least some comment around the issue rather than be seen to be hiding away. So while there's I think a lot of compassion for the royals at the moment because there's a lot of health issues going on. We've got Fergie, Kate and Charles. I think at the same time, the things that he's lined up to do are really things that he's going to be held to account. I think he will continue to want to show up and be seen to be that hard worker and someone who gets out there. He came onto the throne as an older man, obviously, and he didn't really have the opportunity to win the people over a lifetime the way his mother did. But I think he's going to want to be seen to be really hard at work and getting out there to meet people.
And I think Bronte makes a great point. Like, what are the considerations that the royal family thinks about when it's planning these sorts of visits? And are some of those historical issues, is it better just facing them head on and dealing with them?
And they've said that that's what they want to do. I mean, part of the role now is diplomacy, and they've talked about the fact as royals that they will support what each nation wants to do and build a new relationship after, you know, going forward, however that should work. Look, I think this is interesting because these trips are planned a year in advance. So this one later this year will already be planned. And if you think about it, when Meghan and Harry came to Australia in 2018, they did 76 engagements in 16 days. That's 4.75 engagements a day. There is no way the King can be doing that number of engagements. I think they'll lean more into the areas of interest, sustainability, but also it's the timing of the year because Camilla loathes, as you said in your editorial, she doesn't like the heat at all. We see her with an umbrella whenever she's in Queensland. So that will be a factor later in the year. So they'll be trying to moderate it for both of them, as they are at an age now when most people of that age are retired.
And it's harder to cope with things like the heat when you are in advanced years. On to the health of the royals. Charles and Catherine have both obviously undergone recent procedures. How's Kate faring?
So details around Kate's situation have been a lot more scarce. Obviously, she'd had the surgery by the time we even found out that it was happening. It does, in that initial statement, it was said that it was successful. So that was, you know, as we learnt about it, we were also reassured. Ongoing, it seems that she's doing well. She's still in hospital. She's had plenty of high-profile visits from William, and even Charles, before he went in for his own treatment, popped over to her ward to see her. But by all accounts, she seems to be recovering well, but that doesn't change the fact that she's looking down the barrel of weeks and weeks of recovery from whatever this specific surgery was. But it seems to be on track with what they had projected.
Excellent. Now, the King's surgery, quite routine. Camilla is already trying to soften him up to tell him he has to take it easy. And we understand he could be out for up to a month. What is the latest?
Oh, he'll be working. Look, she said at his 65th birthday and at his 70th birthday, you know, he will not stop working. He works right through late at night. In fact, Prince Harry once said, I think it was on his 70th birthday, that his dad would have dinner increasingly later. He'd go back to work after dinner. He'd fall asleep at his desk and they'd go in and he'd wake up with paper stuck to his forehead. So, look, we know he's a workaholic. He doesn't stop for lunch. He has a late afternoon tea and then he has dinner late. I mean, he has waited for this job all his life. So good luck to her getting to him to try and stop. I think it's more her that wants to sit back and have a read of a book rather than be, you know, sort of doing 400 engagements a week. Yeah. So I think she'll have some influence, though.
She will, hopefully. Now, Bronte, again, it's been reported this week, and I know we've had a similar conversation previously about, you know, Harry and Meghan essentially becoming royals for hire. So can you run us through what is the latest criticism that's levelled here?
Okay, so this pretty much relates to to speculation about what their next big deal is going to be. And people, particularly in the palace, would be understandably wary because usually when these big deals come through, so too does a lot of palace dirt.
Yeah, of course.
So with this latest one, this has all been sparked because they turned up on the red carpet at the premiere of the new Bob Marley film in Jamaica, and it later emerged that they were guests of the Paramount CEO, and Paramount was distributing the film. So he had invited them. They travelled there with him. There's obviously a close relationship. Perhaps they're just neighbours and great friends, but of course we're coming off the big Netflix deal that is due to expire at some point in the coming year. I think it's in a year from now, and there has been no confirmation that that's been renewed. So therefore, you are looking at these people looking for their next job, effectively. They can't have 9-to-5ers, and they've got a mortgage of apparently $10 million and huge security costs, a few legal costs at the moment. I think there's a fair few of those running. So it makes sense that they would be looking for another studio to potentially distribute some more content. Although I will say at this point, years in, particularly the reason that this is very interesting is because another studio deal, they're not going to sign Harry and Meghan at this point unless there is a lot more information to divulge or something that's juicy.
Something
because
else.
That's the show. Harry and Meghan is the only show that had the cut through of all their projects.
And I think that's the point, isn't it? No one disagrees that they have to earn a living, but is it just the convenience of the royal background that is the moneymaker?
But there's the issue, isn't it? Because they no longer have that royal contact. They're no longer friends with the Tindalls. The Tindalls are now, you know, chummy with Kate and William. We don't know, well, certainly haven't heard that Princess Eugenie Annie, who was really close to Harry. We haven't seen them together. She's, of course, having babies at the moment, that sort of thing. So I don't think there's much cachet in their proximity to the royals. They don't have refreshed new content.
Yeah.
So the problem with them is that they are interesting to us because they are royal, but they're not interested in being royal.
Yep.
So that's a major problem in terms of...
That's a big disconnect.
It is a
That's
disconnect.
a huge disconnect.
So what do you sell yourself on? And this is the problem. I think when they were in Jamaica last week, Harry would have been standing there thinking, that deal the Queen offered us, that, you know, Queen's Commonwealth Trust, him president, her vice president, being almost like a diffusion line for the royal family, working around the world.
Would have been a good idea,
Perfect job. And you would have been on the pocket as well.
Yeah.
You know, the taxpayer would be paying you. Now, as Bronte quite rightly pointed out, there's a lot of cost. How are they going to do it?
Huge. Now, Bronte, both of us, we've all been quite captivated by the Danish abdication and proclamation. It has been absolutely fabulous to watch. But apparently, the life of the Queen could end up being a TV series not dissimilar to The Crown. Please tell us it's true.
Well, it makes so much sense. Obviously, The Crown was a phenomenon. People were obsessed with it. So there is apparently a show that is looking to begin filming next year, which is being produced by a Danish television company, which will be focusing on the life of the Queen. And Queen Margrethe, who, as you mentioned, had her abdication and the proclamation of King Frederick and Queen Mary that followed. Now, this has all intensified the interest in them at the moment, but this show was apparently in the works prior to that, so TV producers are very happy.
Yeah, with all the extra content that they've all of a sudden landed with.
And also the show would be focusing, it seems, similar to how The Crown went right back to Queen Elizabeth's youth. This would be focusing on Queen Margrethe's youth because she also was not actually supposed to be the Queen initially. Yep. At the age of 13, it was there was a constitutional amendment that meant that women could inherit the throne. So she had actually quite a similar sort of story in that regard to Queen Elizabeth. And as we know, there's incredible interest in Queen Elizabeth even now. So, this show, I think it will be a hit. I will probably need subtitles. But
that's okay.
But
we'll manage. We'll all manage. And Bronte, just one more with you. Now, in that recent book by Robert Hartman in relation to King Charles, an observation is made that by Harry and Meghan leaving the royal family, that brought Charles and the Queen closer together. Is that a fair observation?
Yeah, this is such an interesting one because we really did think we'd really picked at the carcass of their departure from the royal family, but there is always new information coming out. And with Robert Hartman, he's got quite a credible, reliable background and he seems to have very solid sources. So you take all of it with a grain of salt, but it makes sense because the way he puts it forward is that he's been told that the Queen and Charles really leaned on each other during that turbulent, particularly that first year after they left the royal family, and they were particularly rocked by the Oprah Winfrey interview because we know what came later, of course, but at the time, that was the first time they put their names and their own words to that narrative, which we now know so well. So, it makes a lot of sense. It's actually nice to think that they leaned on each other, particularly as it was the Queen's later years. Yep. So she had an extra support, and of course she was going to lose Prince Philip, as we know, a year later. So, it's an interesting new angle to the whole story. It's sad because it's still about, this fracture in the family, but it's nice that there was a strengthening of a bond.
Yeah, absolutely. That and, of course, Kate's uncle is pitched to be landing on Celebrity Big Brother, which I just think is an absolute cracker to round out the week in royal news. Angela Moller, Bronte Koy, thank you so much for joining us. Now, coming up next, Harry and Meghan have again stirred controversy, this time in Jamaica. Russell Myers will join us from London with the details. Welcome back to the show. Joining us now is Royal Editor for the Daily Mirror, Russell Myers. Russell, the health of King Charles and Princess Catherine has really been front and centre over the news for the last couple of weeks. As we watch this scenario unfold, how have the royal family gone about managing their responsibilities?
Well, it certainly has, Caro. Good evening. But, it's been quite a tumultuous time in royal land. I mean, when isn't it over the last few years? But certainly the latest health scares for not only the Princess of Wales, but also the King coming thick and fast in the same day. I mean, it's really sort of set the cat amongst the pigeons of what on earth is happening at the centre of the royal family. But, that old adage of keep calm, carry on, I think we've seen that in spades. But it certainly does sort of beg the question of where on earth the royal family are sort of positioned in this sort of slimmed down world of the sort of new monarchy that King Charles has wanted to sort of put forward over the last few years. So the fact that the Princess of Wales is going to be out, she's still in hospital. I think we're on her sort of 13th, 14th day nearly. She's going to be taking an extended period of leave after this planned abdominal surgery right the way up until the end of April, and the King may be taking up to a month off after his prostate procedure. It really does leave them quite thin on the ground. Also, William's going to be taking a bit of leave, look after the children, be by Kate's side. So the very fact that, they're cancelling tours, cancelling engagements, I think that we've spoken about a slimmed-down monarchy for a long time, but really there are questions at the centre of the monarchy of whether they should be bringing in sort of reinforcements. Could the York sisters make an appearance at the centre of the monarchy? It's certainly an interesting debate.
In other news, it's been reported this week that Harry and Meghan have attended the Bob Marley film premiere in Jamaica. Do we know how that trip came about?
Well, quite unexpectedly. I think nobody expected them to pitch up in Kingston, Jamaica. Nice little holiday spot for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. But they were actually invited by the film premiere's producers. The production team thought that they'd be a fantastic addition for the premiere. But it really did set tongues wagging, because not only were they sort of pictured on the red carpet, this is very much a period where we expect them to be invited to, the big premieres, the big shows, the big award shows. However, they were pictured with the Jamaican Prime Minister, Andrew Holness. And if you remember, he was the man at the centre of the big scandal when the Prince and Princess of Wales went to Jamaica in 2022, when they were the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, of course. And he basically said, don't get too comfortable here. This will be the last time some members of the royal family come whilst we're still having a relationship before we become a republic. So very interesting that Harry and Meghan would put themselves at front and centre, not only at this event whilst the King and the Princess of Wales are in hospital, but to be pictured alongside such a divisive figure as Andrew Holness. And what that means for the relationship with the British monarchy was quite controversial indeed. I mean, to be fair to Harry and Meghan, some people will say they're more than entitled to go to these sorts of events. Damned if they do, damned if they don't, I suppose. But certainly controversy rages whenever they're involved, I think.
And there was a bit of critique around this. That's absolutely true. But is there really any substantive point to be drawn from this, though?
Well, it's interesting. I'm sure that the King and his advisors are looking at the issues of republics, and certainly it is on the rise, not only just at home but abroad. We're looking at sort of the Canadian levels of people who would potentially vote to ditch the monarchy. That is definitely happening in Jamaica. Antigua and Barbuda have signalled their intent to follow suit. And Andrew Holness has really been at the centre of this movement. It has been delayed over the last couple of years, but he was very, very much of the thinking once the late Queen passed away, there wouldn't really be a pace for Jamaica to have a relationship with King Charles. Now, that has stalled over the last few months, but I'm told by people in the country that there is an appetite to get that moving. Then the very fact that Harry and Meghan would be pictured with Andrew Holness sort of hobnobbing in that sort of arena really does beg the question of whether that was a good idea from them at all. But like I said, they are in a sort of brand new world of celebrity, and some people would say damned if they do, damned if they don't. So but possibly a bit unfortunate for them, or maybe they should have known better.
And Prince William, he obviously has a lot on his plate at the moment, both personally and officially, with Princess Catherine being out of action. But a great report this week about the launch of a new Garden City project to help tackle the housing crisis. We've got a housing crisis, it feels like, everywhere in the Western world. Can you tell us about this particular project?
Well, certainly. I mean, we're well adept at understanding sort of our own housing crisis. I know it's a big problem in Australia as well. And the Prince of Wales has said that not only there's a housing crisis, lack of social housing, the homelessness problem is on the rise here in the UK. And he wants to try and sort of solve this issue. Of course, he's taking over the big £1 billion estate of the Duchy of Cornwall, and he's talking about making social housing projects on that. And they have found some land that they bought a few years ago for the Duchy. He's actually created this project by his father when he was in charge of the Duchy as Prince of Wales. But William is trying to take this through to the next level. How can we build more affordable housing in this country? How can we, make sort of big housing estates on land that is not being used, not necessarily in the countryside, which is well protected here in the UK, but trying to free up space and trying to give people better opportunities. So this is going to take part in the Kent countryside in the south of England. It's a great project. The local council were very, very behind it, and I think that it could be one of many projects for the Prince of Wales. I think, ultimately he's trying to do something good. He's trying to do something for social housing, trying to end homelessness, as he's saying. And it's a big project to take on, but he's possibly the right man at the right time to do it.
Now, on this show, we love a historical royal scandal, as you well know, Russell. And Frances, the Duchess of Rutland, has passed away this week at the age of 86. Now, she had quite an eventful life, particularly insofar as it concerned her relationship with her mother. Can you tell us about it?
Well, absolutely indeed. I mean, this is straight out of a sort of storybook of the early Crown that gripped everybody. And it really has sort of gripped high society back in the 1960s, as you say. Frances, the Duchess of Rutland, sadly passing away last week at the age of 86. But it was her mother, Margaret, the Duchess of Argyll, who really created a stir in British society during the 1960s when she divorced her second husband. Now, of course, the talk of high society was why she was divorcing. That went to trial. She was then labelled a harlot and a mistress of several men, alleged to have had more than 88 affairs over their 12-year marriage. And it sort of completely destroyed the relationship with her daughter, who has taken these sort of secrets of her relationship with her mother to the grave. She never spoke about it publicly. But Margaret's story was played in the drama A Very British Scandal by Claire Foy, who played the Queen in the early series of The Crown. So, very fascinating insight into sort of how high society is still being talked about many, many decades later. And it's certainly, if you haven't seen Very British Scandal, I highly, highly recommend it. And certainly Margaret's story was one for the ages.
Russell Myers, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Now, while we know so much about the late Queen, obviously she spent her entire life in the public eye, we occasionally learn other subtle little snippets about her. For example, she collected pepper grinders. And she practised her speech for the state opening of Parliament with a sack of flour on her head when the Imperial State Crown was on display and not available. But my favourite is this. Because the Queen was famous for wearing colourful clothing, she once remarked, "I can't wear beige because people won't know who I am." I love that. And that's the show for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Up next is Newsnight. Good night. We'll see you next week.